On a starless night, Abraham sat on the edge of a cliff, enveloped in the deep darkness of the desert. The only light came from a small fire in front of him, whose flames flickered like his faith, sometimes strong, sometimes wavering. He had heard the voice of God, as clear as the sound of thunder, calling him to leave his homeland, his family, and everything he knew behind. In return, God had promised him something that seemed unattainable, a distant land, where his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. But that night, there were no stars, and Abraham wondered if he had truly understood the divine call. Abraham was a man already advanced in years, without children, married to Sarah, also elderly. To him, God's promise seemed like a distant dream, a mirage in the desert. Sarah, his wife, shared the same dilemma. The idea of having children in old age seemed laughable, almost impossible. And yet, they both felt a restlessness in their hearts, a soft, insistent certainty that they must move forward, even when everything around them seemed uncertain. Abraham, moved by this faith, made a decision that would change the course of his life and history. He gathered his belongings, his cattle, his servants, and together with Sarah, he set out towards the unknown. There were no maps, no certainties, just a promise and the voice of God that echoed in his heart. The journey was long, full of challenges. They crossed unforgiving deserts, where the sand and sun punished their bodies and fatigue threatened their strength. Endless nights passed awake, with Abraham and Sarah looking at the sky in search of the stars that symbolized the promise, but often finding only emptiness. Trials intensified. On one occasion, a great famine ravaged the land, and Abraham was forced to go down to Egypt to seek sustenance. There, he faced dangers and moral dilemmas that tested his faith and integrity. In Egypt, fear made Abraham question his purpose, and he made mistakes, but even in those moments, God did not abandon him. Abraham began to understand that faith was not a guarantee of a problem-free life, but an unshakable trust in the God who called him, regardless of the circumstances. Time passed, and the promise of a child still seemed distant. Sarah, distressed and hopeless, offered her servant Hagar to Abraham, hoping to fulfill her desire to have a son. Ishmael was born, but it soon became clear that he was not God's promised son. This episode brought tension and pain to the family, but it also taught Abraham about patience and the need to trust fully in God's times, and not in his own efforts. Years passed. Abraham was getting old, and the promise had not yet been fulfilled. Desperation was beginning to rise again in his heart. Could it be possible that he had misunderstood? That God had been mistaken? However, even in the midst of doubts, Abraham remained faithful, continuing his journey, continuing to trust. Then one day, something unexpected happened. When all hope seemed lost and Sarah had already given up, angels visited Abraham and announced that Sarah, now 90 years old, would give birth to a son.